What would you do if the very place that was supposed to be your safe haven turned against you? If the dream home you worked so hard for became a battleground overnight? I never thought much about homeowners associations. To me, they were just background noise, groups that made sure the grass was cut and the trash got picked up on time. Annoying, maybe, but nothing more. At least, that's what I believed before I met Debbie. Before I learned just how far some people would go to control others. My partner Mark and I had spent months looking for the perfect home. It wasn't just about location or style, our top priority was accessibility. I've lived with a mobility condition since my early 20s, and while I'm independent in most ways, my body has a way of reminding me that I can't always keep up with the world around me. That's why when we found the one-story house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, it felt like fate. No stairs. Wide hallways. A layout that allowed me to move freely without worry. And best of all, a private backyard with a pool. That pool was everything to me. More than just a luxury, it represented freedom, an escape from the physical limitations I dealt with daily. On good days, I imagined myself floating in the water, weightless and free. On bad days, I pictured myself easing into the pool, letting the tension melt away. I had lost so much control over my own body over the years, but here was something I could reclaim. At first, everything seemed perfect. The neighbors were polite but distant, the kind of people who waved from their driveways but never lingered. That suited us just fine. We weren't looking to become the center of any social circle. We just wanted peace. And for the first few weeks, that's exactly what we had. Then came Debbie. She introduced herself as the HOA president the same day we moved in, standing stiffly at the edge of our driveway as if inspecting the property. She was polite, technically. But there was something in the way she spoke, in the way her gaze flickered just a little too long over my mobility aid, that made me uneasy. When she spoke, her words were directed at Mark, as though I weren't even there. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her smile tight, her voice clipped. "The HOA has strict guidelines, but as long as you follow them, we won't have any problems." It sounded like a friendly warning. At the time, I brushed it off. We weren't planning to cause trouble. We weren't trying to push boundaries. We just wanted to live in peace. What could possibly go wrong? The first time I mentioned the pool steps to Mark, I remember the way his face lit up. It was such a simple thing, removable steps that would let me safely get in and out of the water without strain or risk, but to me, it meant everything. A way to finally enjoy our home without feeling like I had to work twice as hard just to do something normal. We weren't asking for much. The steps weren't a permanent structure, didn't require any drilling, and wouldn't disrupt the aesthetics of the backyard. They blended in so seamlessly that if someone didn't know better, they might assume they'd always been part of the pool. Since the HOA had rules about exterior modifications, we decided to do everything by the book. We filled out the necessary forms, attached pictures, and submitted the request in writing, confident it would be approved quickly. It was, after all, just a small safety addition. A technicality. But weeks passed, and we heard nothing. At first, we figured it was just typical bureaucratic slowness. We sent a follow-up email. No response. Another. Still nothing. At the next HOA meeting, we made a point to attend, eager for an update. That's when we got our first real taste of how things worked under Debbie's rule. The meeting had been rescheduled, without notice. We tried again the next month. Same thing. It was almost as if someone didn't want us there. When we finally managed to catch Debbie in person, standing outside her house trimming her perfectly manicured hedges, she barely looked up as we approached. "Oh, the pool steps," she said, waving dismissively. "I saw your request, but we've been busy handling more pressing matters. I'll get to it when I can." Something in her tone made my skin prickle. She didn't say no. But she wasn't saying yes, either. It was a power play, a way of showing us that our needs weren't a priority, or worse, that she didn't think they mattered at all. Another month passed. Then two. The silence stretched into something deliberate, something personal. Then, out of nowhere, an email arrived. It wasn't an approval, but an announcement of a new HOA rule, one that banned unauthorized pool accessories, effective immediately. And curiously, the rule had been backdated to make it look like it had existed before our request had even been made. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Mark paced the room, fists clenched. "She rewrote the rules just to block us," he said. "Who even does that?" There was no doubt in my mind. Debbie had no intention of ever approving our request. She had ignored us, dodged us, and when we refused to disappear, she moved the goalposts entirely. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events over and over in my head. Maybe she expected us to give up. Maybe she thought we'd take this as a sign to stay quiet and stop pushing. But she didn't understand. This wasn't just about a set of steps anymore. It was about control. About whether I was allowed to exist in my own home the way I needed to. So, the next day, we made a decision. If Debbie wouldn't approve the request, then we'd take matters into our own hands. On a bright, sunny afternoon, we installed the steps ourselves. Mark secured them tightly, testing their stability over and over again. When I finally eased myself into the pool, feeling the cool water embrace me without the usual struggle, a sense of victory swelled inside me. It was small, but it was ours. For the first time in months, I felt free. The victory, however, was short-lived. The next morning, a sharp knock on the door shattered the peace. I opened it to find Debbie standing on our porch, arms crossed, her expression a mask of disapproval. "You can't just install modifications without board approval," she said, her voice clipped, as if she were lecturing a child who had misbehaved. Mark stepped beside me, his stance firm. "They're temporary, removable. They don't violate any written rule." Debbie's lips pressed into a thin, self-satisfied smile. "That's not for you to decide. This is a clear violation of HOA guidelines." I took a breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "We waited for months. You never even reviewed our request." She waved a hand in the air like my words were an annoying fly buzzing around her head. "The board will review it when we have time. Until then, remove the steps. Immediately." Something in her tone made it clear, this wasn't about policy. This was about power. I clenched my fists. I wasn't going to let her win. Mark and I both knew removing the pool steps wasn't an option. Giving in meant giving Debbie exactly what she wanted, proof that she could control us. So, we did the only thing we could. We ignored her demand and carried on as if the conversation had never happened. For a while, nothing happened. No emails, no warning letters. Just silence. But that silence felt ominous, like the air before a storm. And sure enough, it didn't take long for Debbie to make her next move. One morning, I found a letter stuffed into our mailbox, no postage, no official HOA envelope. Just a folded piece of paper with bold, capitalized words, "You are in violation of community standards. Remove the unauthorized pool steps immediately." Below that, another line, "Multiple neighbors have complained about your modifications." I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the note while Mark read it over my shoulder. "This is a lie," I said, my voice shaking. "Nobody's complained." Mark's jaw tightened. "She's making it up." I needed to know for sure. That afternoon, I made a point of casually bringing it up to a few neighbors while out on a walk. And just as I suspected, not a single one of them had an issue with the steps. In fact, most of them didn't even know about them. The next HOA meeting was only a few days away, so Mark and I attended in person, ready to confront Debbie. We arrived early, taking seats near the front as people trickled in. The moment Debbie saw us, her expression twisted into something between annoyance and amusement. When it was finally our turn to speak, I stood up and held up the letter. "We received this in our mailbox," I said, my voice firm but calm. "It says there were multiple complaints about our pool steps. But after speaking to several neighbors, I can confidently say that no one actually complained." I expected her to deny it. Maybe stammer, maybe backpedal. But instead, she just smiled, a slow, smug smirk that made my stomach turn. "Well," she said, folding her hands in front of her. "Even if they didn't complain, I know they were thinking it." A ripple of uncomfortable murmurs spread through the room. I felt my face heat with anger, but before I could respond, she moved on like the conversation had never happened. That was when I realized something terrifying. Debbie wasn't just an overzealous HOA president. She was someone who truly believed she had the right to control us. And she wasn't done yet. A few days later, I checked the mail and felt my stomach drop when I saw an official-looking letter from the city. Inside was a notice stating that our pool was out of compliance with local regulations and would need to be assessed for safety concerns. "What the hell?" Mark muttered, skimming the letter. A city inspector showed up the next morning, clipboard in hand. He was polite, but he meant business. "We received a complaint about unauthorized modifications," he said, gesturing toward the pool. "I just need to take a look and file a report." I let out a shaky breath. "This came from Debbie, didn't it?" He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Between us, she's been calling the office repeatedly. This isn't the first time she's tried to flag a property for violations." It was all I needed to hear. Debbie had gone beyond just HOA nonsense. She was now using city resources to harass us. Luckily, after his inspection, the official found nothing wrong. The steps were removable, up to safety standards, and didn't violate any zoning laws. But the whole ordeal left me rattled. How far was Debbie willing to go? I got my answer sooner than I expected. The weather had been unseasonably warm that week, and after all the stress, I decided to finally use the pool again. I put on my favorite swimsuit, one that made me feel comfortable and confident, and sat at the pool's edge, letting my legs dangle in the water. Mark dove in first, splashing around like a kid, his laughter easing some of the tension I had been carrying. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Then I heard her voice. "What is going on here?" I turned, startled, to find Debbie standing at the fence, gripping her clipboard so tightly her knuckles were white. "Excuse me?" I said, trying to keep my voice even. Her eyes zeroed in on me. "This," she gestured wildly at me, "at the pool, at everything, is completely inappropriate." I blinked. "I'm in my own backyard." Debbie's face twisted in disgust. "People can see you. Children could see you. This is indecent." Mark climbed out of the pool, standing protectively beside me. "The yard is fenced," he said, his voice edged with anger. "No one can see her unless they're deliberately looking over the fence, like you're doing right now." That only made her angrier. Her voice rose with every word. "You're setting a terrible example. This kind of behavior is exactly why we have HOA standards." I felt my hands tremble. A mix of rage, humiliation, and disbelief crashed over me all at once. But before I could say a word, Debbie did something that floored me. She pulled out her phone. And dialed. 911, "What's your emergency?" I heard the dispatcher's voice faintly through the receiver. Debbie's eyes locked on mine as she spoke. "I need officers here immediately," she said, her voice sharp and dramatic. "We have a homeowner exposing herself in plain view. This is a blatant violation." Mark's mouth fell open. "She can't be serious." But Debbie's smug expression told us she absolutely was. Minutes stretched into an eternity as we waited for the police to arrive. I sat frozen in place, my heart pounding in my chest. Was this really happening? Was this woman so desperate to control us that she was willing to weaponize the police over a swimsuit? When the officers finally pulled up, my breath caught in my throat. Debbie stormed toward them before they could even get out of the car, talking so fast I could barely keep up. "She's out here, exposing herself to the neighborhood," she ranted. "It's completely inappropriate and against our community standards." One of the officers, a tall man with a tired expression, turned toward me. His gaze flicked to my simple, full-coverage swimsuit, then back to Debbie. "Ma'am, she's wearing a swimsuit. In her own backyard." "Yes." Debbie snapped. "Exactly. It's indecent." The officer exhaled, rubbing his temple. "This is not a police matter. You're wasting our time." Debbie's face turned beet red. For the first time, she seemed genuinely caught off guard. "But if you have personal concerns, take them up with the HOA board," the officer said firmly. "But this is harassment. I'd advise you to stop." And just like that, she lost. Or so I thought. As I watched Debbie storm off, I had a sinking feeling in my gut. She wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The police may have shut Debbie down that day, but I knew better than to think it was over. If anything, humiliating her in front of an audience only fueled her obsession. She didn't just want control, she wanted revenge. And she wasn't afraid to play dirty. The first sign of trouble came 2 nights later. Mark and I were watching TV when we heard a strange metallic scraping sound from the backyard. It was faint, just a whisper of movement against the still night air, but enough to send a chill down my spine. Mark grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside while I watched anxiously from the window. Nothing. No movement, no signs of anyone lurking around. Just an empty yard bathed in moonlight. But the next morning, when I went out for my usual quiet moment by the pool, something was off. The steps, the very ones we had fought so hard to keep, were sitting at a slightly different angle. When I went to test them, they wobbled. My stomach dropped. Mark rushed over and inspected them, his expression darkening. The bolts had been loosened. A chill ran through me. Someone had tampered with them, not enough to make it obvious, but just enough to make them unsafe. Enough to cause me to slip, to lose my balance, to get hurt. We checked our security camera footage, but the angles weren't perfect. A shadowy figure could be seen moving along the fence line, crouching near the pool, but never showing their face. I didn't need to see their face. I already knew who it was. Furious, we went straight to the HOA demanding to see footage from their street security cameras. But when we confronted Debbie at her office, she simply leaned back in her chair, feigning concern. "Oh dear," she said, clasping her hands together. Unfortunately, the cameras were malfunctioning that night. What an odd coincidence. It took everything in me not to lunge across the table. Mark clenched his jaw. "This isn't a coincidence. This is harassment. And we're filing a police report." She smiled, completely unfazed. "You do what you need to do." So we did. We went straight to the police station and filed a formal complaint, including the security footage we had. But without concrete proof linking Debbie to the sabotage, there was little they could do. The officer was sympathetic but straightforward. "I believe you," he admitted. "But unless we catch her in the act, it's not enough to press charges." That didn't stop Debbie from escalating even further. A week later, a new letter arrived, this time from the city council. It claimed that our pool steps violated local zoning laws and needed to be removed immediately. My hands shook as I read the notice aloud. This can't be happening. Mark snatched the paper from me, scanning it with growing frustration. She filed another complaint, he muttered. She's using the city against us now. We contacted our lawyer, Lisa Carter, who reviewed the claim and immediately called bullshit. There's no zoning law that applies here, she assured us. This isn't about regulations. This is about control, ***. She's weaponizing bureaucracy to make your life miserable, ***. Lisa helped us file an official appeal with the city, detailing exactly how the pool steps met all requirements. We even included the police report from the 911 swimsuit incident to highlight Debbie's pattern of harassment. As we waited for a response, the stress took its toll. I found myself double-checking the locks at night, flinching at every unexpected sound. My once peaceful home, my dream home, was starting to feel like a war zone. Then came the final straw. I was home alone when I heard a sharp knock on the door. When I opened it, a man in a city inspector uniform stood on my porch, clipboard in hand. I'm here to assess a complaint regarding unauthorized pool modifications, he said. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay calm. Another complaint? He gave me an apologetic look. The same one, actually. But it's been escalated. I let him into the backyard, where he inspected the pool area with a level of scrutiny that felt absurd. As I stood there, arms crossed, I told him everything, about Debbie, about the fabricated complaints, about how she had already tried to use the HOA against us and failed. He sighed and closed his clipboard. Listen, he said, lowering his voice. From what I see, there's no violation here. But Debbie, she's been making a lot of noise about this. Pushing it to higher-ups. It's not just about HOA rules anymore, she's trying to get the city to take legal action. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Debbie was done playing games. Now she was going for the kill. But she made one fatal mistake. She underestimated me. The city council hearing was my last chance. Debbie had spent months trying to break me, but she had underestimated just how much fight I had left. I wasn't just defending a set of pool steps anymore, I was standing up for my right to exist in my own home without fear, without harassment, without bending to the whims of a woman who saw herself as the ruler of the neighborhood. Mark and I arrived early, dressed professionally, ready for battle. The room was filled with a mix of city officials, local residents, and of course, Debbie. She sat at the front, smug as ever, chatting animatedly with a few council members like she already knew she had won. But as soon as the hearing began, her confidence started to crack. She went first, launching into an over-the-top performance about neighborhood aesthetics, community harmony, and disruptive modifications. She avoided mentioning me directly, instead painting the issue as a selfless attempt to protect property values. But the more she spoke, the more desperate she sounded. Then it was my turn. I laid everything out, the ignored requests, the fabricated complaints, the sabotage, the police report, the harassment, and now the city manipulation. I emphasized that the pool steps were temporary, safe, and fully compliant. Mark backed me up, speaking with the calm, steady authority of a man who was done being bullied. The real turning point came when our lawyer, Lisa, presented the HOA emails. The room fell silent as the council read Debbie's own words. People like her don't belong here. If they don't get the message, I'll make them leave. A murmur spread through the crowd. Even the council members, who had been neutral up until that point, exchanged uneasy glances. The deliberation was short. When they returned, the ruling was unanimous, the pool steps stayed. The case was closed. Debbie's face turned red with rage, her carefully constructed world crumbling in front of everyone. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse for her, the local news picked up the story. Within days, more residents started coming forward with their own horror stories of Debbie's HOA reign of terror. At an emergency meeting, the HOA board, under immense public pressure, voted to remove Debbie from her position. I watched as she stormed out, her clipboard clutched so tightly her fingers turned white. She didn't even look at me. But I knew, in that moment, she had lost. The pool steps stayed. The harassment stopped. And just like that, I had my home back. It's funny how power-hungry people like Debbie thrive on control, until someone finally pushes back. So tell me, have you ever faced an HOA nightmare? Have you ever had a Karen try to dictate how you live your life? Share your story below, let's see who had it worse.